Thanks for joining. My name is Dan Jacobson with Environment California, and we'll be getting started in just a minute once the Secretary of California Natural Resources Agency, Wade Crowfoot, joins.
I am here.
Oh, hello, Mr. Secretary. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, back at you. Happy almost Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah. Thanks for joining. We are live here in Zoom land. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for taking a couple minutes out of your day to talk about what's important to all of us, which is the beauty of California. Thanks to Corey Brown, an attorney at the Resources Legacy Fund, and thanks to Mark Bareka, who's the Government Relations and Community Affairs Director at REI. And REI is a sports store that I'm sure all of us know. So thanks, and let's just jump into it. And really, the first question that I have, I think, is sort of a fun one for you, Mr. Secretary, who I'm going to refer to as Wade, because you and I have been friends for a long time, so I hope we can move through that formality, which is, what's your favorite place in California that you like to go to, just to be outdoors, whether it's with your family or just to have some alone time?
You know, it's funny. I've been thinking a lot about that because, of course, we're, we've got to stay in our communities. And so this would be the time of year just when like getting up into the mountains is incredible. So I'll tell you this, which is I moved to Sacramento last year with my family, and I get up out on the American River at least about 3 times a week. And I have to say, I grew up next to a river in Michigan, the Huron River, and I had moved to the Bay Area for 20 years. It is so nice to get back along a river and actually see sort of the life of the river. And had a thrill this fall when we were able to spend time and see the salmon spawn and teach my daughter that whole life cycle. And I work so much on salmon issues and endangered species issues. It was incredible to actually experience that. So I'll list that as really a special natural place to me over the last year.
That's awesome. And I'm sure as a lot of the people who are watching this now will be putting into the chat is that in addition to that, if you have a chance to go kayaking on that river, you're going to really love that. There's some really beautiful places to go kayaking or to go whitewater rafting, which is also popular amongst a lot of the Northern California rivers.
It was my birthday last weekend, and my wife got us a 3-person kayak for our little family. So we're excited to do that.
Well, that's really cool. That's really cool. Well, let me just jump in and ask, I mean, you've just talked about sort of the outdoors and how important it is to you, but sort of why is the outdoors so important to people right now, and especially sort of in this time? And I'll start with you, and then I'll ask Mark also to weigh in on that question, sort of from the REI perspective and what he thinks.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, the outdoors is part of who we are in California. And I would argue, on the West Coast and really throughout America, I mean, it's so definitional to our identity. I'll say that during this really challenging pandemic moment, it's been reassuring to know that nature remains out there, actually being able to, sort of almost take a breath with better air quality, less traffic, people. And I think for Californians, across our state, it significantly improves the quality of our life, totally even outside of our environmental values. Just being able to get out there and be outside is a truly indelible part of our human experience.
Mark, what's it like from the REI point of view?
I would wholeheartedly agree with you, Mr. Secretary. Nature is in our nature. And, pre-COVID, we all can be caught up in our fast walks of life, and we can kind of lose perspective on that. This current crisis has, as we all know, been devastating in so many regards. But if there's one glimmer here, it is that being forced to pause and reflect on our humanity and having perhaps more time to get outside does reconnect us to nature. and helps us realize how essential it is to quality of life. And luckily for California, there's so many ways to enjoy the outdoors and enjoy that quality of life. It just reminds us that there's also an equity piece here, and that we have to redouble our efforts to make sure that everybody from coast to coast and everybody within California in particular has an opportunity to enjoy that real richness of being in nature.
Yeah, and I'll just say, Wade, it seems like people really are motivated to enjoy the open space more than ever. And in fact, over 200 members of Congress have signed on the letters. They want to really support and fund what's known as the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which can sound like a mouthful and kind of wonky, but is really one of the key federal programs that allows us to have such great outdoors. Can you talk a little bit about what this program means to California and sort of why it's so important for us? And I'll ask Corey Brown to also weigh in a little bit with this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, I would say most every beloved part of California has been protected specifically because of this fund. $2.5 billion protecting and restoring nature in California has emanated from this fund over the last 5 decades. If you love the Tahoe Basin, the California Desert, Point Reyes National Seashore, Headwaters Forests, open space in Southern California outside of San Diego, that has all been enabled by this federal fund. So I have to say, I'm really energized by congressional leadership actually stepping up and saying this should be part of any federal stimulus, not only to bring our economy back, but continue to improve the quality of the lives that we lead by continuing to expand our open space protection and access for everybody.
And Corey, I don't see you, but I think you're on the line. Is there something that you want to add in from that perspective?
Yes, I think a couple things are very significant. Wade has provided a lot of leadership in setting some real priorities for the state for biodiversity and equitable access. This is a key federal funding source that can help the state accomplish those goals. And as Wade had mentioned, it's touched almost all parts of California, from the border with the Tijuana National Wildlife Refuge and San Diego Bay up to the Redwood Forest and the North Coast, everything in between, whether it be the American River, San Francisco Bay, the Sierra Nevada, and so many other places. These places are not only important to protect for our enjoyment and for inspiration, they're also important to protect for our economy. $92 billion of spending every year in California alone for outdoor recreation, $8 billion alone for wildlife-oriented activities. Creates a lot of jobs and helps our economy. These are essential resources we're going to need to rebuild our economy after this COVID-19 pandemic, as well as to provide people with places to go to be inspired to get away from the stresses of this pandemic, economic stresses and others. So very important to Californians, and all Californians benefit from the Land and Water Conservation Fund.
Yeah, I think that's important to recognize, is that one of the things that I didn't know is that how widespread the Land and Water Conservation Fund protects Californians. A lot of people think, oh, California, it's for beaches, or California, it's for, great skiing. And it really is that people who enjoy the outdoors, no matter where you are in the state of California, are going to receive a real benefit from this. And I think that's why, and this is interesting to me, that you see such transpartisan support for an issue like this. So it's not just Republicans who are for it or against this, not just Democrats who are for it or against it, but you're seeing people really from both sides of the aisle come together and to say, hey, we want to work together to make sure that we can protect. And again, obviously this is a federal program, so it's not just protect what's great about California, but really protect what's great about the United States. And the other piece that I think is interesting is that these programs really protect more than just the big national parks or the big places that we're aware of, but especially in this time, I know in my community here, just outside of Sacramento, we really count on some of the local parks and some of the paths that are connected to some of the dry riverbeds this time of year. And those places are also funded by the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And I think that's just as important too, is that in addition to sort of going out and packing up and hiking for days and not being able to see anybody, that's one thing. But a lot of people here where I live really experiencing nature just by going on the path and going for a run, riding their bike and taking their kids and looking at the stream and seeing a little bit of trash, which is unfortunate, but then also looking at turtles and looking at some of the wildlife that for a lot of people, it's their first and earliest exposure to. And I think it's that combination of what the Land and Water Conservation Fund is able to do, both big, majestic, beautiful places, but also places that we can basically touch and feel and see almost every day. I don't know if anybody has a comment on that they want to share.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, oh, sorry, first and foremost, you're right. Getting outdoors is not a partisan issue. And I think that's why there's sort of a range of leaders that are embracing the fund, that, you know, their constituents want to do that. Some people hike and identify native plants. Other people are fishing and hunting. But the fact is, you know, being outdoors and enjoying the outdoors are part of what it is to be American. And I would say, as Mark said, human. I will say that the fund is really important because every year there are opportunities to preserve important open space. So one example that comes to my mind is outside of Los Angeles right now, there's a parcel that is really important for mountain lion habitat, given the remarkable but threatened population of mountain lions in greater LA. And it also has the potential to be great additional open space on the edge of the Santa Monica Mountains. The challenge is there's not necessarily funding for it. And if you don't actually can link public funding with those acquisition opportunities, it will get developed, into housing or something else. So having the fund at the ready to help out on those sort of local open space acquisitions or bigger things is a really big deal.
Corey or Mark, did you want to add in?
I would just, for everybody's benefit, point out a nuance, a special nuance about the fund, which is that the dollars that go into the fund come off the back of royalties from oil and gas drilling. And so, it's really, there's a fundamental fairness here, if you will, to the extent the American people are, making natural resources available to oil and gas drillers, and they're paying royalties into the federal treasury. Those royalties then come back out and invest in these natural resources that we as all Americans then ideally get a chance to enjoy. And as the Secretary said, there are lots of causes that we need to be leaning into to make sure that we don't lose some of these natural resources that in turn are places for us to hang out and find solitude.
Right. Let me go to a question that came in from Congressman Huffman, which I thought was really interesting. And what he asks is, what can be done to increase the potential for our public lands to be natural solutions to climate change, such as through carbon sequestration or just providing connectivity and habitat for species impacted by climate change? I'll start with you, Mr. Secretary, then I'll go over to Corey and see what you want to weigh in on.
Yeah, I mean, every public land acquisition that we make from here on out has to be multiple benefit. And by multiple benefit, I mean serve many purposes. Not only to provide greater access, so really all Californians have access to the outdoors, but to provide sort of for that resilience of natural places. And so Dan, you gave one good example, which is we have to get ahead of the climate threats that our plants and animals face and really develop habitat corridors and appropriate habitats given changes driven by climate change, whether it's increased drought, temperatures, flooding, wildfire. So I think that that public space acquisition done strategically can really build the resilience of nature to climate change. I'll also note that the fund has funded really good landscape level forest restoration work. recognizing that we need to continue to restore the health of our forests, both for the ecology of those ecosystems, but also to reduce the threat of catastrophic wildfire. So absolutely, this fund is an important tool in our effort to build resilience to climate change.
Corey, what do you want to add?
Well, protecting these lands, especially our watershed lands up in the mountains, our rivers, our streams, also helps us protect our water supplies in addition to benefiting wildlife and recreation. As the Sierra snowpack recedes over time because of climate change, having the places to store snow, to store water, will help reduce flooding, but also help protect our ways that our natural systems filter out pollutants and provide us with clean water. For urban areas, especially as our urban areas get hotter, it's very important to have more shade. Having more parks, more green spaces for urban residents provides a way of having a refuge from especially the very hot summer days, as well as places to exercise. The Land and Water Conservation Fund can fund both of these type of projects.
The next question we got is from Congressman Cox, and what he asks is, how will full and permanent funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund assist California in meeting its conservation goals? So I'll turn it over to you, Wade, first to talk about sort of California and what we're trying to do in order to preserve and protect some of our most beautiful space.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason why we have the protected places that we do is, frankly, this fund, anchoring a generation of acquisition over the last half century. And so if we think about the need to steward our natural places for the next half century, we need those resources. And as I mentioned, they're of large scale, $2.5 billion invested in California conservation through the fund over the last 50 years. Moving forward, again, our Governor Newsom, really driving hard on expanding outdoors for all. So making acquisitions around park core communities to ensure that everybody can actually have their time outdoors, that's going to be critical. This fund plays an important role there. And then protecting and maintaining our natural richness, or what we know as our biodiversity, also critical. We are in California, one of the most biodiverse locations on the planet, meaning we have greater variety of plants and animals than almost anywhere else in the world. But that natural diversity is also threatened in new and serious ways, including climate change and human stressors. So conservation will also be a tool, and the fund will be a tool to conserve those areas most important to biodiversity, particularly, as you mentioned, as migration corridors and habitat needs change amidst a warming planet. So for all of those reasons, this is just such an integral tool. And by nature, it gets spread across the state because our democratic process works that a fund like this doesn't get concentrated on one thing in one area. It really is meant to be spent across the state. And that's why you see congressional representatives from all over our state embracing the restoration of the fund.
I think it's also interesting that we're seeing, in a time like this, and obviously the state legislature has really reduced and focused the issues that it can work on, but Assembly Member, I think Ash Karla has AB 3030, which at least is trying to, is the purpose of the bill is to create 30% protected areas in California by 2030. And, we'll have to see how that bill moves through the political process. It'll be an abbreviated and somewhat unique political process this year, but it's getting a lot of attention from the environmental community, and we're certainly looking at it and supporting it, obviously, and hope that we can get support from enough members in the state legislature to be able to move that and hopefully put it onto the governor's desk, where you'll have then at that point to be able to weigh in and to talk to the governor about it, I imagine.
Yeah, it's a big and exciting idea. It's an international movement protecting 30% of the planet's surface by 2030 for so many reasons, including those biodiversity goals. In California right now, depending on how you slice and dice, sort of how you define protection, about 22 to 23% of our land is under protection. It's about 20, state has about 100 million acres, so that's 23 million acres. So it's an intriguing goal around getting to 30% protection by 2030, because it's both ambitious but potentially achievable with the right public policy.
California is really good at setting ambitious goals. I know we did a law a couple of years ago to get to 100% clean energy, and that's ambitious, and we're making a lot of strides to be able to get to there. And so looking at being able to set a goal like this seems to be at least moving California in the right direction. Let me go to our next question, which I think will be the last question that we have, but it came in from one of our interns, whose name is Natalie Brown. And she's been doing work with us this year, and she's just finishing up her first year at UCLA. And what Natalie asked is, how and in what ways can the state continue to encourage and get the millennials out into these areas? And she noted that probably she's paid more attention to the outdoors now than she has, and certainly some of her friends who might not have been outdoor enthusiasts are looking at it now. But in what ways can the state and can REI and can foundations help to get these millennials out there and to understand the importance that nature has in their lives, not only now, but that it will have as they get older? So I'm going to start with you, Mark, on that, just because that's kind of seems like an REI kind of question, and then I'll move over to the secretary and then close with you at the end, Corey.
So I'll start with the big picture in the long term, and then maybe bring it more close in. 100% agree with the comments from the secretary that this century we need to really focus in on connecting people to our habitat, to our planet. And the easiest way to get connected to your planet, the natural spaces, is if they're out your back door. But there are plenty of places in California, other states, where people don't live within a 10-minute walk of their park. And so we need a mechanism like the Land and Water Conservation Fund to allow us to, over the course of time, assure that everybody has access to nature out their back door. That's a big picture, long-term goal. Nearer term, REI partners and others in our industry, we partner with organizations that run day trips, weekend trips, that advocate for connecting municipal bus lines. We have a bus line that takes folks up to the foothills of the Santa Monica Mountains. We really have to look at all the tools that are available at our disposal, be they not-for-profits, be they public-private partnerships, be they rerouting bus lines or bike lanes, to make sure that we lower as much as we can the barriers to connecting people to great spaces.
Mr. Secretary.
Well, I totally endorse what Mark said. And I'd also, just add on to that by saying, look, let's make the conservation movement relevant to everybody. And that means, bottom up leadership, really listening to what people need who can't usually or can't right now access these places or don't do that. That includes, communities of color, urban communities, but also millennials. How do millennials want to experience nature? What do they want to do? And that includes elevating those young people within our organizations. I know in our state government, we are not good as other entities are at communicating, particularly through social media. And what we found and this is a little bit cliche, but it happens to be true, is when we've actually brought millennials on board on our team, they open us up to a universe we never knew in terms of being able to communicate. Because again, they're helping us communicate in ways that are relevant to millennials. So I'm really, I think from what I see, millennials, are leading and can lead. We just have to give them a broader, better platform to do so.
Corey, any closing thoughts? I know you might know the intern of whom we're speaking, so I wanted to give you a chance.
A little bit. I think some key words. One, information. We've done polling. A lot of residents don't know about the resources that are close to them. Second, equitable access. I think as Mark and Wade spoke about, we need to bring nature closer to people as well as other parks, whether it be things like the LA River, the American River that Wade spoke about, so many other places. Third is transportation that Mark spoke about, because a lot of people don't know, have ways of getting to, whether it be the beach, the mountains, or other places. And fourth, I think we need to use more digital resources to provide that information, to provide the connections for millennials and other young people. Always kids, young people have always been the way to educate older people. We just need to use more tools that will help us reach younger folks, millennials and others.
Well, I'll say this. I've been following you on Twitter for a while, Wade, and the other day you liked, I think, or retweeted a video that was done by California State Park Rangers talking about how to both get out into the state parks, but how to do it in a safe and COVID-19 safety way. And I thought that video was a great example of sort of, I think what you're talking about is it looked like it was produced by millennials. It looks like the millennials were the main people who were in there. And I thought, boy, what a great example of a way to show what you're talking about. We're about to head into a long weekend. I don't want to keep people on the chat or into the Zoom for too much longer, but this is a weekend that historically kicks off the summer. It's when, a lot of outdoor barbecues will start this weekend. It's when a lot of people would have traditionally done their first camping visit to Yosemite or a state park that, has been important for their family for generations. Mr. Secretary, Wade, do you have any closing thoughts that you want to leave us with just as people head off into the holidays today and especially this time?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, this has been obviously a really challenging few months for everybody. And, if I'm being honest with myself, I've spent too much time, attached to my phone, reading the latest CNN story or the most recent diatribe from the president. And actually earlier this week, I had an opportunity to interview a naturalist and an artist, a guy by the name of Obi Kaufman, who has written this book called California Field Atlas. And he reminded us, he said, this is a moment to breathe. This is a moment to restore ourselves as well. And that's not to diminish all the challenges we face, including unemployment and an economy. But his point was the environmental movement's going to need us all. And we're going to need to do things in better and new ways coming out of this pandemic. And so let's take care of ourselves. Let's get outside. And while it's not Yosemite and it's not camping, let's recognize the beauty around us and just redouble our commitment to work toward protecting it.
Well, maybe that's a great place to say thank you all to Corey, to Mark, to you, Wade, Mr. Secretary. We're really grateful to have an administration that's prioritizing protecting the environment. We know we need to do so much more. We know that for the past 2 months, there's been a real priority on making sure that we can get out of this current situation. But we're grateful and we're happy to see such a dedicated team. And we look forward to continuing to work with you and to making sure that as we come out of this, that the expression I've come up with is that we can come out greener than we went in. So thank you all. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your time. Thank you for everyone who joined. Again, we've been live streaming this. We're on Zoom. We're live streaming it through our Facebook pages. And we'll continue to get this message out to the rest of the community. But thank you all and have a great weekend and happy Memorial Day.
Thanks,
you guys. Take care.
And thanks for your comments, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you guys. Take care.